just observe the world and what you can do to make it better, as opposed to looking in the mirror. Looking in the mirror, the Zoom screen or the social media mentions, or even the physical mirror, all that is doing is focusing on me. That's called the me self. Rather, spend more time in the I self, observing the world.
It's really interesting. We'll come back at the end to an example, I think, a very sort of current example where I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts on. But you're talking empathy, talking about compassion. These all involve behaviors towards other people. And a
Right.
lot of the time, happiness or the path to a good life is portrayed as something that you do for yourself, your own self. You sit and you practice self-care and self-love, and that is how to have a better life. But your book is very much emphasizing that it is much more about the way you behave towards others or bring others into your life. That's what you would say is putting people more on a path to happiness.
Absolutely. I mean, what we have a tendency, an evolved tendency, to do all kinds of things that don't make us happy. Mother Nature really doesn't care if we're happy at all. Mother Nature really wants us to survive and pass on our genes. I mean, the higher path, the divine path, is one in which we can love and be loved, which is really not a prerogative of our natural instincts. And so we need to do things that don't necessarily feel as natural as they otherwise would. And that's a perfect example. When I don't feel good, I want other people to help me, and I want to help myself. And I'm not really very focused on the needs of other people, but the research is very clear. When you want more love, the way to get it is to go love another person. When you want to actually feel more belonging, the way is to go and give somebody a better sense of belonging. If you really want to lift yourself up, lift other people up is really the way that it works. And it's not a natural phenomenon necessarily. Some people are naturally better at it than other people. You know, I'm kind of a selfish person naturally. I have to work at this all the time. I have to write notes to myself to make sure that I'm not doing that. We give a lot of hints on how to do that, by the way. And one of them, which is a great happiness enhancer, is to try to make time in your day every day to just observe the world and what you can do to make it better, as opposed to looking in the mirror. Looking in the mirror, the Zoom screen or the social media mentions, or even the physical mirror, all that is doing is focusing on me. That's called the me self. Rather, spend more time in the I self, observing the world. The Japanese Zen Buddhists, they talk about this an awful lot. It's a very beautiful thing that they talk about, where they just observe. It's an attitude of outward observation, and in so doing, they finally find peace. Quite frankly, there's no more turmoil than focusing on yourself all the time, being the big star of your own psychodrama, which is one of the reasons that zooming out on life, the majesty and the awe, and quite frankly, the enlightenment that comes from practicing your religion, which I do. I have a traditional religious practice. It gets me out of me, which is just so boring.
I mean, you do say, well, let's talk about faith, definitely, but you do say, just to stick on the mirrors and the me self, you say, I mean, perhaps try not to have mirrors around, try
Right.
very hard not to take selfies, try not to go online and put photos of yourself, or try to look to Facebook or social media for satisfaction or for completion. But then some people would say that to them they feel insecure, or they don't feel a full sense of self without checking those things, that brings some sort of fulfillment to their lives.
Yeah, that's an addiction. And so mirrors, both virtual and real, that what that does is that a little bit of affirmation that comes from seeing somebody like your Instagram post, or checking your looks in the mirror as often as you possibly can, that gives you a little hit of a neuromodulator in the brain called dopamine, which is anticipation of reward. And we get very hooked on the stimulus and response. We get very hooked on a particular action that gives us a little tiny bit of this spritz of neurochemical that has a kind of a relief factor that it gives us in our lives. And the more we do it, the more addicted we are. And the more addicted we are, the more that we do it. And the result of that is that people check their phones 600 times a day. What are they checking their phones? Is somebody writing to me? Is somebody talking about me? Is somebody thinking about me? Is somebody posting about me? And that's just no way to live. I talk in the book, Oprah and I talk in the book about somebody I've worked with very closely, who was an Instagram influencer on fitness. So this is a guy who, he's showing his abs on the internet for, fun and profit. And what a way to make a living. I mean, he said that in order to look the way that he does, one of the great ironies of the fitness industry, is that to look as healthy as possible, you have to do things that are not healthy. And so there's a lot of illusion. There's a lot of smoke and mirrors and a lot of unhealthy behavior. And he said he didn't eat what he liked for 10 years. He didn't have proper relationships, all kind of weird physical problems. And so he finally said, I'm stuck. I'm addicted to how I look. I need to get away from that. So he literally took all of the mirrors out of his house. And then he showered in the dark for a year. So he couldn't see his own abdominal muscles, to get away from this constant me self of the objectification of who he was as a person. And it really changed his life. Now he's, dedicated to helping people in all sorts of different ways. And he's a good friend and a really good family member. And he saved his life, quite frankly, by doing this.
But we do live in a very different world, don't we? We live in a world where it's very hard for a lot of people to avoid. I mean, mirrors is one thing, but the online presence, or just a digitization of society, and perhaps more stressful for people to try to entirely disappear from that, to switch that all off, because that is the world we live in. So it's a balance, isn't it?
It is a balance, and you have to live in the world, but we need a lot less of it than we think. What I would recommend is that everybody who's watching us, that they do just a little experiment, which is to take the social media apps off your phone, just get rid of the apps, and then to only look at your social media on your computer, and only do it for a total of 30 minutes a day in the morning across all of the apps, across all of the applications, across all the platforms. Why? Because you'll look at it all at once, you'll scroll a little bit, but you're going to be rationing your time, and you'll mostly be using it to kind of keep up to date with people that you like and know, as opposed to, wasting your time understanding what Kim Kardashian is up to, for example, or, watching ridiculous videos or scandalous stuff, or feeling lonely because you're not being involved, or social comparison, or all this kind of stuff. So just a little experiment. The first couple of days are hard. And the reason is because the dopamine in your brain is screaming out to get some satisfaction. Your brain is saying, feed me more dopamine. Don't do it. It'll be okay. You'll survive. And then after a few days, it'll start to get better. And by the end of the week, you're going to notice you have a lot more time on your hands and you feel a lot better about yourself. You might just, like I did, leave those applications behind for good.
And what about the socialization aspect of people who are otherwise on their own? I mean, we obviously saw a huge peak in this during the pandemic, but still after that time, there are people who live on their own or who don't live in big communities, and the digital world can help them. But
Right.
of course, I mean, it's two questions in one, really. But it's what about them, and also, I suppose, how did the pandemic change that sort of socialization, and how important is it for happiness?
Well, what we get, what our brains want with respect to relationships is a hormone. It's a neuropeptide that functions as a hormone in the brain called oxytocin. We're evolved to produce this molecule called oxytocin, which is referred to by scientists as the love molecule. It's in your brain what links you to other people, and it's intensely pleasurable when you first lay eyes on your newborn baby, or you see your parents for the first time in a long time, if you have a good relationship with them, or your closest friends. But you only really get oxytocin with eye contact, real eye contact, and touch. You don't get it very much, just a little tiny trickle of it from social media. And when people are virtual and they're not live, you get a little bit of it from Zoom, from these platforms, but not very much. And touch is the real deal. So if you're substituting human relationships for virtual versions because of convenience and distance, you're going to be starving. And what's going to happen almost inevitably, it's like getting all of your meals at McDonald's. There's nothing wrong with going to McDonald's from time to time. I say this as an American, this is a lot of what we eat over here. But every meal, what's going to happen is you're going to get not enough nutrients and too many calories. You can literally become obese and malnourished at the same time if you're getting all of your food at fast food outfits. That's the same thing as social media. You want the oxytocin, and so you binge the social media, and you only get a little trickle, and so you're binging, doing something bad for your brain. At the same time, you're actually getting lonelier and wasting your time. You need real humans to the extent that you possibly can, and we need a society where it makes it easier for us to get that.
Yeah.